What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers podcast here from Grind City Media. We're coming to you live from the Built for Tough studio here in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm Lane Whitaker. That guy over there is Russ Bankston, and Russ wrote a book, History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers. So I called my friend Russ, and I was like, hey, let's talk about these sneakers and talk about basketball, which is kind of what we've done for a long time now. So we're on to chapter 12 for us of these episodes, podcasts, whatever, that we're doing. And we got into the year 2000, which is not as futuristic anymore as it once sounded to say in the year 2000. And we got into the AND1 Tai Chi. We don't have the shoe here, so I brought the book, Russ's book here, which has it. Great picture of it there.
There it is.
That was the shoe that, of course, it's all backwards. That was the shoe, of course, that Vince Carter wore in the 2000 dunk contest. That's kind of how it's probably best known. But, I mean, really, we worked at Slam Magazine. We saw AND1 grow from nothing into something and then back to kind of nothing again at the time. And there's so much sort of culturally tied into this shoe to me that I think still sort of resonates now. Do you remember the first time you heard about AND1?
It was it had to be at Slam. I mean, we were there when it started.
Maybe those T-shirts?
It was T-shirts, yeah. I mean, it was slogan T-shirts with the player, which was their logo, which was some guy and wearing shorts and
it looked
no
like
face.
the Silver Surfer kind of.
Surfer if he played basketball and was very upset.
I actually found this website that lists some of the phrases that were on those shirts.
Some of the phrases.
Because you would go to Champs or Foot Locker and they would have 15 different shirts with different phrases that said get off the court, you're embarrassing yourself, don't laugh, you're next.
There was one with your girl or something.
I'm sorry, I thought you could play. Give and go, give up the game and go home. I'm the bus driver. I take people to school. That was a good one. I saw a picture of you on the milk carton.
Nice.
Lots of things like that. So they were just sort of these I don't want to say diss T-shirts because they weren't really. They
kind of were. I mean, and it was start of where
trash talk,
back of the book ads. It's these little quarter page kind of things, and other companies kind of had vaguely similar stuff. I mean, I don't even remember who all those companies were, but they were really the ones who.
The headband that had the extra
thing. The D-band.
The D-band. Yeah.
Shout out Jamal Crawford and Ron Artest. They had they had a legit business plan because I think it was a project basically that started at Wharton Business School with a couple friends. And, they eventually, since they got to partner with bigger stores and sneakers were so blown up at that point, it's all right, we're going to do a shoe too.
Yeah.
And, their first shoe, they wanted to sign Iverson. Everyone wanted to sign Iverson. Iverson got way too much money. There's no way they could have afforded him.
That's a lot of T-shirts.
So, I mean, before even they did the shoe, they signed Larry Johnson just to do apparel for them. He already had a sneaker deal.
He had a Converse deal, right?
Yeah, I think it was Converse, and he wore Fila at one point too.
Grandmama.
But this is when he was on the Knicks, so it's or maybe it even started when he was still in Charlotte. But
from what I read, I think it's in the book, they started selling T-shirts in 93. So they've been selling shirts for 6-7 years. And building up to the point where they were trying to get into the sneaker thing.
Well, it was really only 3 years before they did the shoe because the first shoe was the Stephon Marbury one because they ended up signing Marbury in the draft. And, I think for us at Slam at the time, Stephon Marbury was basically who Slam was built on.
Yeah.
It's Stephon obviously also talks about what do you call it? Why is my mind going blank? But he got game.
Yeah.
Right? Being essentially
that's his life story.
It's Coney Island.
Yeah.
But Stephon was also
it's Lincoln High School, basically.
He was the first basketball diary.
Yeah.
I think most people first heard of him probably in Darcy Fry's book.
Yeah. The Last Shot, I think.
Yeah, we're talking about his older brother's son.
He had a brother,
Shaka Schiff.
He had older brothers Eric and Don who played. One of them played at University of Georgia
with Dominique. Right?
Yeah, but Steph was the young one of the family who was going to be the one who transformed everything. And
I think and kind of almost the last chance. It's Steph. I think he enters that book riding a big wheel onto the court. He's 11 or something, and is out there playing with grown men, you know, and like at the garden at Coney Island, which they named the garden because that's as close as they thought they'd get.
They called it the garden, but it was an outdoor court outside. Right. Yeah, the housing project.
That got refurbished. But like, you know, and Steph eventually makes it like not only to Georgia Tech, but to get drafted in the lottery and ends up playing for the Knicks, even though
I saw like so back, but back then, like it was also like it's probably important to remember like a lot of the times these high school players and those guys were still kind of myths. Like you couldn't watch them on YouTube, you couldn't see their games on ESPN or whatever. Like it was very rare to actually see them play. Maybe you would read about them in Sports Illustrated or something like that. But for the most part, like you didn't really know if they were what they were like. I went to Steph's first college game. It was when he was at Georgia Tech. They played like one of those exhibition games against like Marathon Oil or somebody. And I remember going to see him play, and like within 2 minutes, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I've never seen anything like this guy. Like he pulled up for a jump shot and jumped 4 feet off the court, you know, and you're like, oh, what in the world? Yeah. And then he's like, he caught a windmill like on an alley-oop during the game. And you're like, oh, this guy's like a 6'1" point guard. Like this is crazy. He's making those like wraparound passes where he spins around, no look pass. Like I'd never seen a player who played like that and was able to have that athleticism and everything. So as soon as I saw him play, I got it. I'm like, all right, now I know why this is the way it is.
And I mean, Georgia Tech at the time was already like point guard You had like Mark Price who played there.
And Steph was following Kenny Anderson who was also a New York kid. And I mean, they had Travis Best, like all these other guys who had come through there. And so Steph was like the next one.
And I think, I mean, I'm sure you realize in that first game, like he ain't going to be there very long.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was still sort of controversial for a player to be there one and done. At the time. And I remember talking about it with some friends of mine whose parents went to Tech. And they were like, look, if my son was a freshman at Georgia Tech and a company came and said, we'll pay you $5 million a year, I'd say, leave, go take this job. Yeah. And that's what happened to Steph.
And I think he played like one game against Iverson, right? Like there was like one Georgia Tech, Georgetown game. But, you know, like Steph comes into the league. He'd befriended him and Kevin Garnett were friends. And like, again, like way before social media. So they're like ringing up long distance phone bills. Yeah. They end up playing together in Minnesota. And I mean, it's funny, like, again, this chapter's on the Tai Chi, but like talking to people who were at AND1 at the time, it's incredible because I remembered some of this and didn't remember some of it. I remember the ankle breaker ads. And like they ran some ad, like I think it was like an X-ray with like a plate in there and
sort of remember
and
that
stuff.
Yeah.
And they built up this ankle breaker thing for Steph, and Steph ends up like spraining his ankle in his home debut.
His first game.
He hadn't even done anything yet. Yeah. Like they barely had a chance to like welcome him to Minnesota, and like he's already injured. And he made it back, and he had a really good rookie season. But like just the thought of like, okay, we're this young company launching this shoe with this one player.
Yeah, because that's all they could afford.
And he sprains his ankle, like the worst injury to have. It's one thing if you break a finger, but like it's your foot.
But the Steph thing doesn't last with AND1. He's there for a couple of years and leaves. And by the time you get to like the 2000, 99, 2000, whatever, like they don't have a superstar player really under contract as an AND1 guy.
Right. And I think like it was a weird time in sneakers because you had, you know, Jordan come in with the Air Jordan 1 in 85 and like retired once and came back. And like they kind of, Air Jordan, I think, expanded the idea of what a basketball shoe market could be. Yeah. And like had blown it out so big. And around then is when he retires again. Yeah. You know, last shot in 98, he's done forever. He was done forever, right? He never came back, I don't think.
I think so.
Yeah, I don't remember. But anyway, he's gone at that point, and sneakers have gotten pretty expensive and pretty high tech. And I think tech in sneakers and maybe in anything else, like you eventually kind of paint yourself into a corner. Yeah. Like it can only get so light before you start to give up other things. Like it can only get so expensive. Yeah. Like, sure, you can make a shoe like anything you want for a pro player, but if you expect people to buy it and if you expect parents to buy it, you know, you can only go so crazy. You know, you can only go back to like the $180 pump so often. Yeah. And And I think like if any company was going to make a sneaker that was kind of going to have the utility of a t-shirt, it would be a t-shirt company to do it.
That makes sense.
And with the Tai Chi, I think like, even if you look at it, like there's a little bit of the Jordan 11 to it with the use of color, with the shank plate, but it was at a much lower price point. Yeah, and they did way more colors from the beginning.
Yeah.
So,
but that shoe was it was also like perfectly customizable, right? Because it's just white and a color.
Yeah.
So like any color you throw in there, you know, it's almost like the Air Force One. Like it's so easy to just make it whatever you want.
And I think you could also kind of keep the price low and still have it look good, because it was this big piece of leather on the one side and a big piece of nubuck on the other. So it's like, it's a fairly simple shoe to put together.
Yeah.
And it didn't have super huge M1 branding. You know, and they were able to then make these player editions for like everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I seem to recall like black and purple ones for the Bucks, or like black and blue, like Stefan was wearing it again.
Yeah.
And then white and blue. And like, you could kind of tiptoe around that line of like the NBA needing the shoe to be 51% white.
Yeah.
You know, and I think with a lot of other models, it would be a little more difficult to figure out, because you had all these little pieces and stuff. And this was like, no, it's a huge panel.
Yeah.
Like, this has to be legit. Once you get it approved, you can endlessly turn out versions
whatever you
of
want. Yeah. You could, like I said, it's customizable. I thought, but then somehow we get to 2000, the Tai Chi comes out. It's fine. It's, you know, and Vince Carter somehow gets in the middle of this, who's not even signed to AND1.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, so Vince, we talked about it in the Clyde episode, where, you know, Puma kind of would get into basketball, something would go wrong, they'd get out.
Yeah.
10 years later, they'd try again.
Yeah.
So they signed Vince, and Vince coming out of North Carolina, I think like he kind of had that quote unquote next Jordan, because again, he went to North Carolina, he could jump out of the gym, but I don't know if people realized like whether he would carry a team in the NBA or not. You know, you had Jerry Stackhouse, who had kind of been in that position earlier, who signed with Fila. It didn't quite work out in Philly because they drafted Iverson the following season. So Vince gets drafted and traded on draft day for the guy he played with at Carolina, and Anton Jameson.
Yeah.
Goes from Golden State to Toronto. And at that point, I think even Toronto, like they had success a little bit with Camby. They had Tracy McGrady, who was still not quite Tracy McGrady yet. You had Damon Stoudemire before that. So Vince ends up signing with Puma because they were willing to give him a signature shoe.
Yep.
He goes to Toronto and is immediately like, again, like you have that Jordan vacuum. Like you don't have his highlights to play anymore. Yeah. Well, here's Vince Carter like dunking on literally every single person on earth. I think he went through the phone book and was like, okay, it's your turn now.
Yeah.
You know, and it didn't matter who you were.
Yeah.
He got Dikembe. He got Alonzo Mourning.
I mean, we mentioned like there weren't really.
He got Rick Smits.
There weren't mixtapes and stuff back at that point. But we had this Slam one.
Oh my God.
We had this videotape that lived in the Slam office of Vince just dunking on everybody his first 2 seasons, and we would watch that thing about once a week, something like that. We watched it so often. Eventually, we did a story in Slam where we showed Vince that tape and watched it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, Vince was dunking on everybody, but he didn't like the Pumas.
And the Pumas didn't work for him for whatever reason. Yeah. Like, I don't know if they weren't comfortable. Like, Vince was kind of reticent to really get into, like, all the reasons. But he had signed this long-term contract with Puma. And it became clear very soon into that first year, or by the time that first year was over, like, this ain't happening.
Yeah.
So he had to get out of that deal. And a lot of the money of whatever the next deal he signed was going to have to go to Puma.
Yeah.
To kind of pay off the remainder of that contract.
It was a huge buyout, right? It was like
big buyout. And you know, he had to wear stuff in the meantime if he wasn't going to wear Puma.
Yeah.
And that first year, that was the lockout.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately the lockout ate the All-Star game.
Yep.
So no All-Star game, no dunk contest. The prior season, there'd been no dunk contest. They actually got rid of it for that 1 year to have 2-ball with an NBA player. Because I think the dunk contest got a little sour.
Yeah.
I think Kobe was the last champion in 97.
Yeah.
So, we're going into this next season. You have All-Star in Oakland. You're going to have the dunk contest again. Vince decides he's going to be in it.
Yeah.
And he still doesn't have like a real sneaker deal.
Yeah.
He wore a bunch of different stuff that year. He wore like some really random Adidas.
Yeah.
But AND1 was sending him a ton of stuff, as you would. Like,
sure.
Why not?
Yeah.
Like, if he wears it, that's great.
Yeah.
And
the Tai Chi was like, what, $79? Like, it wasn't crazy expensive.
It wasn't a super expensive shoe. And, what little this all turns on. And Vince...
$75, sorry.
Vince ends up wearing it not only in the All-Star game, in which he was the leading vote getter that year, but in the dunk contest too. And the reason he did was, and this reasoning is very simple, he had to wear a new pair of shoes for this because maybe they're not making crazy shoes for guys yet, but at the same time, you don't want to wear a pair you've been wearing for the All-Star game and for the dunk contest.
Well, because the All-Star game, it's different now, but the All-Star game, All-Star weekend used to be when everyone debuted the new shoes for a while there. Remember, you would wear
the new
something.
Jordans were always
every All-Star weekend was like you came out with a new colorway or a new player edition or whatever it was. So he wanted to have some heat for All-Star weekend.
And Vince had, AND1 was smart. They sent him shoes in black and red and white and red with his number on the back. And the thing is, for Vince, who I think is a 16 or a 17, like he's got some big dogs for a guy who's like 6'6", 6'7". Those were comfortable out of the box.
Yeah.
He could take them out of the box, put them on, and go out and play in them right away. And that was what he was looking for. So dunk contest comes around. Vince laces up a brand new pair of Tai Chis and like breaks the pre-internet.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Ben Osborne at Slam and I were there in Golden State. And we're on like the opposite end of the arena, like in the upper deck. And Vince comes out and does his first dunk, which, if I remember correctly, was like a 360 windmill.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely perfect. And we kind of both looked at each other being like, what just happened?
And he immediately does the "it's over," right? Like,
I think he did the like "it's over." And Ben and I had separately written like, this isn't a contest, it's a coronation. I think we both wrote the same thing, and that ended up running in the magazine. And like, the thing that people who weren't there or didn't watch it live probably don't remember is like, Steve Francis was absurdly good in that dunk contest.
Yeah.
Tracy McGrady was really good. Like, either of those guys would have won in other years, but like, I mean, I don't care if God himself came down and dunked in that dunk contest, Vince Carter would have beaten him.
Like 7 or 8 years ago when Vince was he was on the Grizzlies actually. And there was like at the start of the season, he was toward the end of his career. At the start of the season, these videos kind of went viral of Vince doing dunks like in an empty gym and doing some of those same dunks. And people are like, oh my gosh, he can still do all this stuff. And then there's this rumor like, oh, Vince is going to do the dunk contest. They're going to bring him back. He's going to do it because that's the only dunk contest he did. He did the one and he quit. The Grizzlies were in New York. And so I went to the game and I was like, well, somebody should ask him about this. So I just asked him. And I was like, are you going to do the dunk contest again? And he joked around. He was like, yeah, those videos are actually 3 years old. They're not recent. And I walked away and he goes, hey, and he called me back and he was like, he was also like, he said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not doing this. And as I walked away, he called me back. He goes, hey, he was also like, why would I mess with what I did?
Yeah.
Like, why would I mess with the memory of that? Like, I did it. It was amazing. It was great. And if anything I do now is just going to kind of devalue it. And he understood that. And he was like, why would I mess with that?
And like, you had kind of a couple guys who did that, who did the one and done and won. Like, I mean, even Kobe obviously in '97 did it once and was over.
Yeah.
Brent Barry only did it once. He never even took his warm-up jacket off.
I know.
I still bug him about that. Like, he has that warm-up jacket still, and like,
you know, he got the trophy. There's a big basketball on the top. He got it. He took it to a metal shop, and he got it cut in half so it's removable. And he puts like chips and dip on the side of it.
That's the best thing to do.
Shout out Bones.
But yeah, and I think, like, you know, a big part of the reason I wanted to write about the Tai Chi was that it's like, you know, the idea that here you have this shoe that ends up making an impact is one of AND1's biggest sellers ever, along with the 2 Chillin', which I think is one word, and I think recently was finally retroed. It's like it's a slip-on, like, you know, pre or post game shoe kind of. They sold like a ton of those too.
Yeah.
But the biggest name with the Tai Chi was Vince Carter, and Vince Carter was never actually on AND1. Like,
that was the part that shocked me in the book, because I didn't know, like it's clearly, it's got to be the best on court moment for AND1 in the history of the company, and it was just free.
And I think they realized that after the fact. It's like, you know, had they signed Vince as a rookie, when maybe they could have afforded him, but they would have had to do a signature shoe because otherwise Puma gets him anyway.
Yeah.
You know, that's risky for them. But they couldn't have signed him right away when he decided he was leaving Puma, because there's no way they could have paid off everything. And then once this dunk contest happens, and I think their CFO brought it up, you know, when I was talking to people who were there, like, there's no way you could have paid for anything that good.
No.
You know, and like, if you sign him then, you're paying him for that because that exposure is priceless.
Yeah.
But then you're either putting him in a different shoe, or you're putting out, you know, the Vince Carter Tai Chi with his number on it after the fact.
Yeah.
You know, is there any guarantee you're going to get even more out of it than that?
It sort of worked, like, though, that, you know, we talked about how when Marbury was coming out, there were no viral videos, but that was one of the first things that kind of went viral, that 2000 dunk contest. And like, that's sort of when you started that's around the time I became the online editor at Slam, and we couldn't run videos on the website. There was no way to, like, if you were lucky, you found like an animated GIF of something and you just, you know, ran it 5 pixels by 5 pixels.
I was going to say,
like,
it was like,
tiny and grainy.
Yeah, but Lego
like,
person?
That was the best you could do. So,
yeah.
But that was about the time when the internet started catching up to the rest of the world, and you were starting to be able to see these videos and see all this stuff. I mean, AND1 clearly capitalizes on that next, because then all of a sudden the AND1 mixtapes come out.
The mixtapes come out. Some of those guys went on to do Hoops TV, which was more of a
website
video-centric sort of thing.
I while we were doing this, I sent a picture to Jacob in the studio, because at some point in there, I went to an Adidas commercial shoot, and that's when the air up there, one of the AND1 guys did a 720 dunk, and it was the first time anyone had seen a 720 dunk, and it was going viral. And I saw it on my laptop, and as you see there, Gilbert Arenas, Tracy McGrady, Tim Duncan, and Kevin Garnett came over. And they're like, wait, what happened? And I'm showing this on my laptop to them. Look at KG in the back. Like, they were all amazed, but it was still like a tiny little video. And we were
Arash?
Yeah, it's Arash Markazi next to me. We were on the set of this Adidas commercial in Los Angeles, but it was an AND1 video that went crazy. And like, those AND1 mixtapes were so popular.
And it's crazy that, like, I mean, people maybe don't understand, anything that could get Tim Duncan to actually look at it, like, is pretty incredible.
People don't know about Tim. We should do like a whole Tim thing at some point. Tim's the best, but like, people don't know, like, he has so much personality. But
also it's like, yeah, like, I mean, you remember those names, right? You know, and Vince, that's the thing, Vince would have sort of fit in.
Oh yeah.
Like, I mean, Vince is half man, half amazing. Like, that's an AND1 name almost.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it was a Rucker name that Kenny Smith apparently just stole from some guy at Rucker and started using it on the broadcast. Yeah, like that sounds like an AND1 guy.
Right. And so many of those other guys, you know, AO and I can't even remember.
Escalade, all those guys. The Professor.
R.I.P. Escalade.
Yeah. Skip to My Lou. Like, all those guys who were on those early videos.
Right. Wally Dixon. I'm spacing on what his
Homicide
name was. No,
the Bone Collector?
Bone Collector is a different guy too. Wally Dixon was a dunker, but
I'll
remember
I'm
his
just throwing
name
out AND1 guy names now.
But I mean, just the mixtape and the mixtape tour. I mean, I think like, that sort of built on even that shoe, even though the Tai Chi wasn't exactly like connected to the mixtape, but like just this democratization and like the idea of like even someone like the Professor getting picked up out of like nowhere, or like the 720 dunk and like all this different stuff. I remember there was a mixtape game, I think in DC the year All-Star.
Yeah, we went to it. Yeah.
We went to that.
I remember,
I remember going on the bus at one point.
Shout out Manny Murphy.
Stop. Main Event. That's what this one was. Main Event. Sorry, Main Event.
Here in Memphis, it'd be Maine, M-A-N-E. But the Tai Chi was like so simple. It was $75. You could get any colorway you wanted to match whatever you wanted. And for AND1, like, a company, you're a startup, you're trying to break into this footwear market that's crowded and everything. And
right.
I mean, imagine lucking into Vince Carter wearing your shoe in the greatest dunk contest of all time.
And doing things no one had seen before. Yeah, and like, since then, I think we've seen some of the things Vince did. We've seen other guys go up and stick their elbow in the rim.
Yeah.
And like, I think guys like even before that probably jumped high enough to do it. But like, Vince was the one who thought like, what if I actually hang like this for a minute? Like, which is insane. I don't even know how you do that.
The great postscript about all this is that one day, and I don't know what year it was, 2006, 7, 8, I'm sitting at my desk at Slam, and I get a phone call from this PR person. This is one of the most surreal phone calls I ever received. And they're like, hey, Stefan Marbury told us we should reach out to you. He has a new sneaker line coming out. And I was like, okay, who's it with? And she's like, it's with a company called Steve & Barry's. The shoes are going to be like $14 each. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, what? There's no way this is going to happen.
That's like the sales tax.
She's like, no. The shoes are $14.99 per pair. You can also get gear that's like $9 a piece. And I was like, come on, this is not really happening. She's like, come up to there's a store on 34th Street.
Yep.
Come up here.
Store too.
Yeah. And they let us come up there and just take anything we wanted. It was like a shopping spree because I mean, it probably cost them $80 for and I got every pair of Starberries. I got the gear, and the thing turned into like a real thing. Like it was actually successful, and you saw people wearing Starberries everywhere.
Steph got the logo tattooed on his head.
Yeah. I mean, Steph ended up, and then he goes to China and becomes a legend over there. It has, wins titles and
museum and
statues. Yeah, like it's funny, like the way it all kind of worked out for everybody. And then Vince goes on to become a Nike guy and become the Shocks guy.
And that's the thing. And it's funny because AND1 talks about, oh, can he replicate this? And then he goes and like in the Olympics jumps over Frederick Weiss's head. And Frederick Weiss never even comes to the NBA. Like, and I'm sure that's not the whole reason, but like, there had to be part of that. Like, you're never going to live that down.
Yeah.
And that was the year that I think the Knicks drafted Fred Weiss a pick ahead of Ron Artest, which, given that Ron Artest was from New York, like, how do you miss that? But yeah, and Vince goes from this very simple shoe to the Shocks, which was a little more complicated. I think those probably did take a little more out of the box. To get going. If Shocks existed for that dunk contest, I don't know if he wears those in that dunk contest.
Yeah.
I didn't actually ask him that. That would have been a good question.
If he was getting paid to, he probably would have worn them.
But yeah, I mean, Vince, and he talked about it leading up to that. Until the Nike deal was done, there were some very specific rules he had to follow. Like, he would literally go back in the locker room and take his shoes off and come back out and do interviews in his socks because he didn't want to be seen, like,
in Pumas.
Obviously you have to play in something, but... And he was wearing, I think, Shocks early on. And actually that Shocks shoe, the BB4, which I still love, doesn't really have super overt branding. Nike did that Alpha project, which was just 5 dots.
Yep.
And there was like a swoosh molded into the heel counter. But other than that, like the Shocks kind of were the logo. Like if you saw Shocks, you knew what they were.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, I've known the story of Vince. I've known the story of AND1. There was a great Netflix documentary about AND1 recently, but I didn't know that he wore those shoes for free in the dunk contest, and AND1 didn't know he was going to wear them. Like they weren't even there.
And like it's weird because there was, I think, an AND1 athlete in that dunk contest. I forgot whether it was Larry Hughes maybe was wearing AND1 already. Like, but yeah, I mean they had no idea. And I can't imagine what it must have been like to see that moment happen in real time and be like, oh my God, he's wearing our shoes.
And then he goes out and does
we need to make a lot more of these.
Yeah.
And And the Tai Chi is still like kind of the most iconic, I would say, AND1 shoe, or the most recognizable one.
Yeah. And it changed everything. That takes us through our chapter 12 for our podcast series, and we'll be back with chapter 13 shortly. But he's Russ. I'm Lang. You're watching the History of Basketball and A History of Basketball in 15 Sneakers podcast here on Grind City Media.
If you're looking for even more sneaker culture content, check out the Sneak Fest Show with me, Kelsey Wright Johnson, Sherman, Adam, and Jerry, live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on Grind City Media YouTube and the brand new Grind City Media app.